The entire company was at a standstill. The new CEO, Gustavo, was about to lose everything because the main vault's password was forgotten. In panic, he humiliated the new young cleaner, Bianca, saying she was too stupid to understand what was happening. Seeing the chaos, she dropped the mop, walked to the safe, and to everyone's mockery, began to type. And the sound the door made afterward sealed the CEO's fate. The silence in the boardroom of Bastos Industrial Holdings was a shroud of mahogany and aged leather, heavier than the steel the company produced. Gustavo Bastos felt the weight of that silence on his shoulders, a pressure his Italian silk tie seemed to intensify with every second. Outside, the Pittsburgh sun bathed the city in a golden light, but inside, a gloom of failure reigned. In the corner of the room, impassive and monumental, stood the vault, a monumental, German-engineered steel cube, impenetrable, guarding not only the company's original incorporation document, but also the last remnant of hope. Without that paper, the merger with the Transcontinental Group, which promised to save the company from bankruptcy, was dead. The capital injection, meant to modernize production and secure hundreds of family jobs, would become a mirage. The entire legacy built by his father, Armando, a true fortune in assets and history, was locked away, mocking his incompetence. Gustavo ran a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair, a gesture of contained frustration that fooled no one in the room. The board of directors, comprised of gray-haired men in expensive suits, avoided his gaze, pretending to analyze reports they already knew by heart. They had tried everything. The best specialized safe technicians in the country, experts with state-of-the-art equipment, all had failed. The passcode, an 8-digit sequence, had died with his father. He was always a man who kept his cards close to his chest, Gustavo thought bitterly, recalling how his father controlled every aspect of the business, centralizing decisions and information. He had inherited control of the company, but not the key to its deepest secrets. The inheritance now felt more like a burden than a blessing. Stock prices were plummeting with every piece of news about the impasse, and investor pressure was relentless. It was in this moment of peak tension that the door opened with a soft creak. Bianca, the newly hired cleaning attendant, entered the room. She was almost invisible in her gray uniform, a small, silent figure who moved along the edges of life and the company corridors. She carried a bucket and a mop, her gaze always downcast, focused on the floor that needed to shine. No one ever spoke to her, and she seemed to prefer it that way. Gustavo only noted her as a peripheral blur, an unwelcome distraction amidst his torment. She began her work in the opposite corner, the gentle sound of the mop on the marble floor, the only noise to break the oppressive stillness. However, as she passed near the vault, she stopped. It was only for a second, a fleeting instant, but her eyes fixed on the steel door, on the digital keypad, whose red light blinked like a malevolent eye. Her pause, so brief, was the trigger for Gustavo's bottled-up fury. All his frustration, his fear of losing the family empire, and his anger at his own helplessness needed a target. And she was standing right there, fragile and anonymous. "What are you gawking at, girl?" His voice boomed like thunder in the silent room, making everyone jump. He turned completely toward her, his face contorted in a mask of contempt. "You think your pea-brain can solve a problem that stumped the experts? Get back to scrubbing the floor. That's the only thing you're good for." The humiliation echoed in the room, heavy and cold like the steel of the vault. The directors hunched in their chairs, looking away, embarrassed by the cruelty. Bianca, however, remained motionless, her eyes fixed not on Gustavo, but on the safe, as if listening to a secret no one else could hear. Gustavo's words, laced with venom and arrogance, hung in the air like a toxic cloud, yet they didn't touch Bianca. Inside, an ocean of old memories protected her from the storm of his contempt. She knew that tone, That impotent rage. It was the same tone he used when they were children, and she, accidentally, broke one of his expensive toys. He was the visible heir, the crowned prince of the Bastos fortune, while she was the shadow, the secret daughter who lived a simple life in a blue-collar district, loved and protected from a distance by a father who divided his heart and time. Armando Bastos hadn't given her the famous last name or access to the luxurious assets, but he had given her something far more valuable, the truth of her origins. He visited her on Thursday nights, bringing treats and stories about the difficult start, about selling a blue '75 Chevy Nova and the dream of building something from scratch. He taught her about the dignity of work and the true meaning of wealth, which wasn't in a bank balance or stock dividends, but in character and the bonds money couldn't buy. While Gustavo saw her as an anonymous servant, she saw in him the spoiled boy who never understood his father's sacrifice. A man who viewed the company merely as a cash flow to be exploited, an asset to be displayed, rather than the legacy of sweat and hope it truly was. The public humiliation didn't hurt her. On the contrary, it ignited a long-dormant flame of justice in her soul. It was time. The promise she had made to her father on his deathbed, that she would protect the company from her own brother, needed to be fulfilled. With a calmness that unnerved everyone in the room, Bianca dropped the mop, which clattered softly against the bucket. She dried her hands methodically on her cotton apron, a gesture that was almost ritualistic. Every movement was deliberate, imbued with a purpose none of them could comprehend. Then she started to walk. Her rubber-soled shoes made no sound on the polished marble, but her silent presence was more resonant than any shout. Everyone's eyes followed her. The directors, previously bored, were now on the edges of their seats, curiosity and astonishment etched on their faces. The family lawyer, Atty Davies, a discreet man who always remained in the corner, observed her with particular interest, a spark of recognition in his eye. Gustavo, meanwhile, felt the blood rush to his face. The audacity of this woman was a direct insult to his authority. The insolence of her silence was more deafening than any response. "What now?" he scoffed, his voice trying to regain the control he felt slipping away. "Trying 1022. Get out of the way, you useless employee!" The threat in his voice was palpable, but Bianca didn't hesitate. She continued her steady walk, stopping only when her fingers were inches from the vault's numeric keypad. The red light pulsed, a metallic heart guarding the secret of her life. She took a deep breath, not out of fear, but to steady the memory, to honor the man who trusted her. That vault didn't just hold a document, it held her identity, her rightful inheritance. It was the key to her past and the door to her future. Ignoring Gustavo's snarling, she raised her hand, her fingers trembling not from uncertainty, but from the magnitude of the moment she was about to unleash. Bianca's hand, small and bearing the discreet calluses of manual labor, hovered over the keypad. The brushed steel was cold to the touch, indifferent to the human drama unfolding around it. Gustavo's shouts faded into background noise, like the annoying buzz of an insect she chose to ignore. In her mind, the boardroom vanished, replaced by the image of her humble childhood kitchen, bathed in the warm light of a Sunday afternoon. Her father, Armando, sat at the table, the smell of grease and coffee ingrained in his work clothes. He pulled her onto his lap, his eyes, usually tired from the long workday, shining with a unique affection. "Never forget this day, my little one," he whispered conspiratorially. "It's not the day the company was incorporated, but the day the dream became possible. The day your mother and I sold the only thing of value we owned, that noisy blue '75 Chevy Nova, to buy the first piece of equipment. This number isn't about business, it's about us. It's our secret, the foundation of our family." With the memory pulsating in her veins, her fingers moved with unshakable certainty. The first digit, a soft press of one, Gustavo stopped shouting, surprise overpowering his rage. An expectant silence fell over the room. Each click of the keypad echoed like a heartbeat. 0. Another. The directors leaned forward, eyes fixed on the unbelievable scene. 2. 2. She didn't look at the numbers. Her fingers danced over the keypad as if they had a memory of their own, guided by an invisible force. 1. 9. A tie. Davies adjusted his glasses, an almost imperceptible smile forming at the corner of his lips. 7. The 7th digit. 5. The last one. 0. For an eternal instant, nothing happened. The red light blinked one last time, stubbornly. Gustavo let out a short, scoffing laugh, a sound of relief and mockery. See? A total waste of time. Now get out of... His voice died in his throat. The red light extinguished, and in its place, a green light, bright and vivid, flashed on. A faint hiss cut through the air, the metallic click of an ancient tumbler's unlocking. It was a subtle sound, yet it resonated in the room with the force of an explosion. A low, deep groan followed, the sound of the heavy steel pistons receding for the first time in years. The massive vault door, which had resisted diamond drills and brilliant mines, moved a few millimeters forward, breaking the hermetic seal that held it fast. The air that emerged smelled of old paper and secrets kept for too long. The entire room collectively held its breath. No one moved, no one dared to blink. Gustavo was pale as a ghost, his mouth agape in an O of pure shock. His thoughts, which previously revolved around lost dividends and falling asset values, were now blank, paralyzed by the impossibility of what he had just witnessed. The cleaning lady, the invisible girl he had humiliated moments earlier, had done the impossible. The door was unlocked, and with it, the Pandora's box of the Bastos family was about to be opened. The electric hum of the vault mechanism was the only sound for long seconds. The steel door, now slightly ajar, was a portal to a truth everyone in the room felt, but no one could name. It was Gustavo who broke the spell. The shock on his face gave way to furious confusion. His mind, accustomed to dealing with the cold logic of balance sheets, ROI, and cash flow, couldn't process the scene. Reality refused to fit into the world he knew, a world where money bought solutions and people had well-defined places. The cleaning attendant belonged on the floor, not at the center of power. "How?" he stammered, the word dragging out of his dry throat. He took a step forward, his finger trembling as he pointed at her. "How did you know that number?" The question was not a request for information. It was an accusation. He looked at her as if she were a sorceress, someone who had used some cheap trick to violate his family's sanctuary. Bianca finally turned to face him. There was no triumph in her gaze, only profound calm and a hint of sadness. The wall of invisibility she had built around herself for weeks had crumbled, revealing a strength no one could have suspected. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady and clear, cutting the tension of the room like a sharp blade. Because October 22nd, 1975 isn't the company's founding date, Gustavo. Each word was slow, deliberate, ensuring he and everyone else heard her perfectly. She saw the incomprehension on his face, the impatient furrow forming between his brows. She continued, and her next words were the stone that shattered the stained glass window of Gustavo's life. "It's the date our father and my mother sold her blue 75 Chevy Nova to make the down payment on this plant. Our father." The phrase exploded in the silence. Gustavo recoiled as if physically struck. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a deathly pallor. What are you talking about? My father only had one legitimate son," he retorted, his voice a mixture of denial and panic. But the seed of doubt had already been planted. He searched his memory for any clue, any mention of a second family, a secret that could shake the foundations of his inheritance. Nothing. To him, Armando Bastos was a business titan, a man whose life revolved around increasing family wealth, transforming the initial sweat into a multi-million-dollar empire. The idea of a secret love story, a romantic sacrifice involving a blue Chevy Nova, was as alien as the idea that the company could fail. While Gustavo staggered under the weight of the revelation, the family attorney, Atty Davies, who had been a silent statue in the corner, moved. His polished leather shoes clicked softly on the marble. He looked not at Gustavo, but at Bianca, with a respectful, almost complicit nod. He walked to the now open vault, his expression serious but resolute. Carefully, he pulled the heavy steel door fully open. The interior was small and austere, containing only a few leather folders. He reached inside, ignoring the thick, prominent folder on top, and sought out a thin, yellowed envelope hidden at the back. Turning to the room, holding the envelope with the reverence of someone holding a sacred artifact, his eyes met Gustavo's. "She is correct, Gustavo," the lawyer said, his voice resonating with the authority of law and truth. "Your father was a more complex man than you imagined. He always knew about your arrogance." Atty Davies began to open the envelope with careful fingers, and the sound of the old paper tearing seemed like the prelude to thunder. The lawyer's phrase, "He always knew about your arrogance," hit Gustavo with the force of a slap. It wasn't the revelation of a possible sister that destabilized him, but the confirmation that his father saw him clearly, with a posthumous disappointment that reached him now, coming from inside a vault. The empire he commanded, all that vast fortune in assets and business, suddenly seemed built on quicksand. "This is absurd!" he exploded, his voice hoarse with disbelief. "A farce! Atty Davies, you were my father's lawyer for 40 years. Are you going to believe this fraud?" He pointed at Bianca, his face red with fury. "It's obvious what's happening here. She discovered some weakness, some old story, and is trying to exploit the crisis to extort money. It's a scam, an attack on our assets." Atty Davies did not flinch. His eyes, behind the thin-rimmed lenses, were calm and steady. "My duty was never to your arrogance, Gustavo, but to your father's will. And his will was to protect the company's legacy, not just your cash flow." He slid his thumb across the edge of the envelope, opening it with a care that bordered on reverence. From inside, he withdrew a folded, time-yellowed document, its edges worn. It was not a modern laser-printed will, but an old contract bearing the stamp of the State Commerce Registry from decades ago, signatures made with a fountain pen. "Your father left the main bulk of his estate to you?" "Yes," the lawyer continued, carefully unfolding the paper onto the mahogany table. "He gave you the cars, the properties, the financial investments, the majority of the shares he personally held. He gave you the wealth, but the power, Gustavo, the power he entrusted to the one he knew would understand its true value." The directors, previously mere spectators, now resembled wax figures, each paralyzed in an expression of shock. The family drama unfolding before them had the potential to completely redefine the company's future and, consequently, their own. The merger, the crisis, everything seemed small compared to this fundamental revelation. Atty Davies adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "This, gentlemen, is the original Articles of Incorporation for Bastos Industrial Holdings, the founding document everyone was looking for." He pointed to a specific clause in the middle of the page. "Your father owned 49% of the shares," he said, looking directly at Gustavo. The information dropped like a stone into the silence. 49%. Not total control, not the absolute ownership he had always believed he possessed. Gustavo's mind raced, calculating scenarios, looking for loopholes. Who held the rest? An old, deceased partner. Treasury shares. The remaining 51%, and the lawyer's voice continued, methodical and relentless. The controlling interest belongs to the co-founder and majority shareholder of the company. He paused dramatically, letting the weight of those words settle in the room. Gustavo frowned, the name failing to come to mind. He had never heard of a co-founder. His father had always told the story as a solo journey, a triumph of his own willpower. Atai. Davies lifted his gaze from the paper, and his chin subtly pointed toward the young woman who remained silently by the vault. A woman your father kept secret to protect her from you. Gustavo's breath caught in his throat as the terrible conclusion began to form in his mind. The lawyer then finished, his voice clear and emotionless. Bianca. The name Bianca, pronounced with legal formality by Atty. Davies, echoed in the boardroom like the final verdict of a trial. Gustavo didn't even know he was facing. His world, a universe meticulously built on the certainty of his birthright and the unquestionable power of his capital, disintegrated in an instant. He looked from the lawyer's impassive face to the cleaning attendant's face. The same girl he had insulted, whom he had relegated to the invisibility of her job, was now the most powerful figure in the room, the owner of his fate, the company's destiny, his father's legacy. The shock was so profound, so visceral, that he felt physically ill. The adrenaline that had fueled his anger drained away, leaving behind a freezing emptiness. Majority shareholder, co-founder. The words spun in his mind, devoid of meaning. It was impossible. His entire life, his identity, was a lie. Bianca, meanwhile, felt a wave of conflicting emotions. There was a pang of vindication, silent justice for the humiliation suffered not only that day, but for a lifetime spent in the shadows. But this feeling was quickly swallowed by an overwhelming weight of responsibility. Gustavo's gaze, now stripped of all his arrogance, was that of a lost, helpless boy. For the first time, she did not see the tyrannical CEO, but the half-brother she never had the chance to know. A man molded by excessive privilege and the lack of the kind of love she had received, the love that came with stories about a blue Chevy Nova. She understood, with painful clarity, her father's intention. Armando did not want to disinherit Gustavo, but to force him to see beyond the numbers, beyond profits and assets. He wanted his two children, from such different worlds, to meet and perhaps save not just the company, but the soul of the family. The silence was broken by one of the directors, an older man named Horace, who nervously cleared his throat. Atai. Davies, with all due respect, is this legally binding? A document so old? The lawyer raised a hand to silence him. It is the most important document of this corporation, Horace. Registered, notarized, and perfectly legal. Mr. Bianca is, as of this moment, the controlling shareholder of Bastos Industrial Holdings. The formality of the title, Ms. Bianca sealed the new reality. She was no longer the cleaning attendant. She was the final authority. With this confirmation, Bianca took a step forward. Her posture shifted. The shyness that once defined her evaporated, replaced by a quiet authority that came not from pride, but from purpose. Her eyes, which previously avoided confrontation, now met Gustavo's, not with mockery or contempt, but with unshakable firmness. She looked at her shocked brother, at the room he had commanded with an iron fist, at the administrative and financial chaos his reckless management had created, culminating in the current crisis. The merger was a necessity, but it needed to be renegotiated under new terms. Terms that protected the employees and the company's integrity, not just the executive's net worth. She had the power now, and with power came duty. The duty to honor the memory of her father and mother, to protect the dream for which they sacrificed everything. And the first step toward rebuilding was removing the architect of the destruction. With her voice still soft, but weighted with the irrefutable force of 51% of the shares, she gave her first order as the company's leader. Gustavo, she said, the word sounding strangely formal. You're fired. The phrase, simple and direct, was a neutron bomb. annihilating his career without touching a single piece of furniture in the room. And then, with a touch of irony that wasn't lost on anyone, she added, looking at the confusion of papers strewn across the table, "Now, please call someone to clean up the mess you made in this room." The dismissal hung in the air, more shocking than the paternity revelation. For the directors, it was the collapse of the established order. For Gustavo, it was the abyss opening at his feet. He opened his mouth to protest, to shout, to invoke the power of his name, but no sound came out. The name Bastos was no longer his shield. The true Bastos stood there in a cleaning uniform, dismantling his world with terrifying calm. The final blow, the request that he clean up his own mess, was a masterpiece of poetic humiliation, surgically returning to him the contempt he had so generously distributed. The silence in the room was broken by an unexpected sound. Atty, Davy's cell phone. He glanced at the caller ID, and his serious expression deepened. "Excuse me, Miss Bianca, I need to take this. It's Zurich." The mention of the Swiss city made everyone hold their breath again. Zurich was the headquarters of the European conglomerate with whom they were negotiating the merger. "Attai," Davies answered, speaking in fluent, concise German. The responses were monosyllabic, but his face grew paler. After a few minutes, he hung up, his expression grave. "Bad news," he said, his voice low. "They know news of the vault and the founding document somehow leaked. They are aware of the shift in controlling interest." Gustavo let out a bitter laugh, a sound like a sob. "It's over. They're pulling out. Without the merger, the company won't survive this quarter. Congratulations, Bianca. You inherited a sinking ship." But the lawyer shook his head. "That's not it, Gustavo. They're not pulling out. On the contrary." He turned to Bianca. "They want to move the meeting up to tomorrow. Here, in Pittsburgh, the CEO, Herr Steiner, is en route on his private jet, but the proposal has changed drastically." Atting Davies paused, choosing his words carefully. "They no longer want a merger. With the leadership instability and the revelation of an unknown majority shareholder, they consider Bastos Industrial Holdings a high-risk asset." The momentary relief on Bianca's face vanished. "They're making a new offer, a hostile takeover bid. They want to buy the entire company, dissolve the Bastos brand, and absorb only the assets that interest them, such as the patents and the client portfolio. The rest, including most of the employees, will be discarded." The room, already in shock, plunged into a state of silent panic. Salvation had turned into annihilation. The merger that promised to inject capital and preserve jobs had transformed into a corporate vulture circling to devour the carcass. Gustavo, despite his situation, felt a chill. He might be arrogant, but the idea of seeing his father's name erased from history and hundreds of families jobless was a nightmare. Bianca felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. She had just taken control, only to be informed she was about to preside over the liquidation of her parents' dream. The power she had just inherited felt like a crown of thorns. She looked at the faces of the directors, men who had dedicated their lives to the company, and saw in them the reflection of her own fear. Herr Steiner, the Swiss billionaire known for his aggressive business tactics, wasn't coming to negotiate. He was coming to dictate the terms of surrender. Atty Davies continued, "Their offer will be low, offensively low. They know we are desperate, without cash flow and with debts coming due. They are going to crush us." Suddenly, Bianca understood. Her father hadn't just left her control. He had left her a test, an impossible battle. And she had less than 24 hours to find a way to fight, with no army, no resources, and against a giant. Her first act as leader would not be a restructuring, but a war for the survival of the soul of Bastos Industrial Holdings. The news of the hostile takeover fell upon the room like a death sentence. Gustavo's dismissal, which moments earlier had seemed a cataclysmic event, was now a footnote in a much larger crisis. The euphoria of justice was replaced by the chill of panic. The directors began to whisper among themselves, their voices a hum of anxiety. They spoke of liabilities, supplier debts, and the imminent collapse of the stock price. The company was vulnerable, bleeding, and the Swiss shark had smelled blood in the water. Gustavo, leaning against the wall, seemed to have aged 10 years in an hour. The hatred he felt for Bianca was momentarily eclipsed by the horror of the situation. Seeing his father's company carved up and sold for scrap was a much greater humiliation than any firing. He, who saw himself as a business titan, had led the empire to the brink of the abyss, making it easy prey. Bianca, however, felt something different stir within her. Fear was there, a cold knot in her stomach, but beneath it, a spark of defiance began to burn. She thought of her father, his calloused hands, the nights he came home exhausted but smiling, because he had managed to close a small contract that would ensure the week's wages. She thought of her mother, who sewed professionally to help pay the bills in the early years, believing in her husband's dream. Bastos. Industrial Holdings was not just a collection of assets and liabilities. It was a living organism, built with sacrifice and love. She would not allow it to be dismembered by a foreign investor who saw the world through a profit and loss spreadsheet. "No," she said, her voice low but firm, cutting through the murmurs of panic. Everyone turned to her. "We are not going to surrender." Horace, the older director, looked at her with pity. "Miss Bianca, with all due respect, you don't understand. Herr Steiner is a predator. He has billions of euros in assets. Our working capital won't last 2 weeks. We have no way to fight. The best option is to negotiate the best terms for the sale and try to save what we can." Bianca walked to the large mahogany table, the center of power that was now hers. She placed her hands on the cold wood, feeling the weight of history beneath her fingers. "You are mistaken, Horace. The value of this company is not just in its balance sheet. It's in its name, its employees, its history. That is what we will use to fight." She turned to Atty Davies. "You said their offer will be low because they know we are desperate. What if we aren't?" The lawyer looked at her, intrigued. "What do you suggest, Ms. Bianca?" Bianca took a deep breath, the ideas forming in her mind with surprising clarity. "They want to buy our assets, but our biggest asset is not for sale. Our people. I want you to call a meeting with the union for the first hour tomorrow. I want all employees gathered in the yard before Herr Steiner arrives. I want him to see the faces of the people he intends to discard. Next," she turned to the finance director, "I need a full report on all our innovation projects, especially those that were shelved due to lack of investment. The prototypes, the patents in development, everything." Finally, she looked at Gustavo. He stared at her with a mixture of resentment and curiosity. Their worlds had collided, and now, paradoxically, their interests were aligned. "Gustavo," she said, her voice devoid of animosity, "no one knows our competitors and the international market like you do. I need a vulnerability analysis of Steiner, his businesses, his investments, where he is over-leveraged. Find me a weakness, something we can use." The room fell silent, astonished by the sudden display of leadership. The cleaning attendant was giving orders, and for the first time, no one dared to question her. Night fell over Pittsburgh, but at Bastos Industrial Holdings, the lights in the boardroom stayed on, transforming the executive floor into a beacon of frantic activity. The atmosphere of shock gave way to a tense, focused energy. Under Bianca's unexpected command, the team that once served Gustavo now moved with a new sense of purpose. The cleaning attendant they barely noticed had revealed herself to be a born strategist, and her calm determination was contagious. Atty Davies was on the phone, using his vast network to organize the logistics of the employee assembly while researching legal precedents to resist a hostile takeover. The finance and operations directors plunged into piles of reports, unearthing forgotten projects and data that painted a picture of the company not as a failing entity, but as a sleeping giant with unexplored profitability potential. Gustavo was the one who struggled most with the new reality. The idea of taking orders from Bianca, the secret sister who had usurped his throne, was venom to his ego. For almost an hour, he remained in his corner, a volcano of wounded pride, refusing to participate. He watched cynically as she drew diagrams on a whiteboard, connecting people, patents, and market possibilities with surprising logic. She didn't speak the verbose language of the MBAs and investment funds he so valued, but she spoke the language of the real company, the factory floor, the products his father was proud to manufacture. It was then that he saw it. Amidst her scribbles, she circled the name of an old project, the Bastos lightweight alloy, a revolutionary metal blend his father had developed years ago, but which had been abandoned for being too expensive to mass produce with the technology of the time. The memory hit Gustavo like a lightning bolt. He recalled late-night conversations with his father, who called that alloy the future. A future that Gustavo, in his eagerness for quick profits and plump dividends, had deemed an expensive, inefficient delusion. He looked at the reports the finance director was analyzing and realized what Bianca was planning. She wasn't going to try to prove the company was valuable as it was. She was going to prove how much it could be worth. Potential was the trump card. Gustavo's hesitation dissolved, replaced by a cold pragmatism. Helping her was no longer a matter of submission, but of self-preservation. If she failed, he would lose everything. If she won, perhaps something would still be left for him, even if it was just the family name. He stood up and walked to the whiteboard. "You're approaching this wrong," he said, his voice clipped but lacking the scorn of before. "The lightweight alloy isn't your main argument. It's the bait." Bianca turned to him, surprised. "What do you mean?" Gustavo grabbed a marker of another color. "Steiner doesn't care about long-term potential. He cares about monopoly. The patent on this alloy isn't just valuable to us. It's a direct threat to one of his largest investments in the aerospace sector. His main portfolio company relies on a supplier that would be annihilated if we produce this at scale." He began scribbling on the board, connecting companies, shares, and stock market movements. "He isn't coming to buy Bastos because it's cheap. He's coming to bury this patent before anyone realizes the gold we have here." For the first time, the two siblings looked at each other not as enemies, but as co-conspirators. The war against Steiner had forged an improbable truce, and in that room, amidst cups of cold coffee and the smell of old paper, a desperate and audacious plan began to take shape. The early morning hours advanced, and the city outside grew quiet. But the boardroom of Bastos Industrial Holdings pulsed with a feverish intensity. The dynamic between Bianca and Gustavo had transformed into a complex ballet of tension and collaboration. He, with his encyclopedic knowledge of the global corporate chessboard, and she, with her intuitive understanding of the company's heart, formed an alliance as improbable as it was powerful. Gustavo, armed with his laptop and a formidable memory for numbers and names, delved deep into Herr Steiner's empire. He exposed the conglomerate's financial architecture, revealing a complex structure of shareholdings, debts, and high-risk investments in volatile sectors like cryptocurrencies. "He looks like an unshakable billionaire, but look here," Gustavo said, pointing to a graph on the screen. "Much of his net worth is tied up in assets that rely on stability." He used the stock of his most solid companies as collateral to secure massive loans for speculation. If the value of those shares drops, even slightly, he gets a margin call from creditors. He's not a king in a stone castle. He's a tightrope walker on a golden wire. Bianca absorbed every word, connecting Steiner's financial vulnerability to her own strategy. The Bastos lightweight alloy patent was more than innovation. It was a missile aimed directly at the foundation of her adversary's empire. If the news that Bastos Industrial Holdings was about to reactivate the project and seek new investment for mass production reached the market, the shares of Steiner's main company, Aerosteiner, could suffer a significant drop. Not enough to break him, but perhaps enough to force him to divert his attention and resources to extinguishing the fire in his own backyard, instead of focusing on the hostile takeover. It was a risky gamble, a bluff of epic proportions. They didn't have the capital to reactivate the project, but Steiner didn't need to know that. In the business world, the perception of power was often more important than power itself. While Gustavo devised the financial attack plan, Bianca focused on the human flank. She met with Atty Davies and the Human Resources Director to prepare her speech for the employees. She wouldn't talk about interest rates or cash flow. She would talk about pride, legacy, and the promise of a future where they wouldn't just be numbers on a layoff spreadsheet, but partners in the company's reconstruction. She recalled stories her father told her about the first employees, men and women who worked for promises and faith, helping to build the steel plant from the ground up. She wanted every employee, when facing Herr Steiner, not to feel like a victim, but like a guardian, a soldier defending their territory. The strategy was twofold. While Gustavo prepared the attack on Steiner's wallet, she would prepare the defense of its soul. The alliance forged that night was not just about saving a company. It was about the collision of two worlds, capital and labor, cynicism and hope, personified in Armando Bastos's two children, and by dawn they would be ready for the battle of their lives, side by side, against a common enemy. The sun rose over Pittsburgh, tinting the sky with shades of orange and pink, but few at Bastos Industrial Holdings noticed. The main yard, usually a transit area for forklifts and trucks, was packed. Hundreds of employees, dressed in their blue uniforms, formed a sea of apprehensive faces. Rumors of the hostile takeover had spread like wildfire overnight, and the fear of mass layoffs was palpable. They gathered in small groups, whispering, their eyes fixed on the improvised platform where the board was positioned. Bianca stood at the center, flanked by Atty Davies and, to everyone's surprise, Gustavo. The sight of the two siblings, side by side, was a silent declaration that the house, though shaken, was not divided. When Bianca took the microphone, a deep silence fell over the crowd. She wasn't an experienced speaker, but her voice, unadorned and laden with unmistakable sincerity, captured everyone's attention. She spoke not as a CEO, but as Armando Bastos's daughter. She recounted the story of the blue '75 Chevy Nova, of her parents' dream, a dream that wasn't about building a fortune, but about building a community, a family. "Every one of you," she said, her voice thick with emotion as she looked at the faces before her, "carries a piece of that dream. This company is not the machines or the buildings. It is us. It is the knowledge passed down from father to son here. It is the pride in our work." She then spoke about the approaching threat. "In a few hours, a very rich man will come here. He doesn't see us. He sees numbers, assets, profit. He will tell you that we are obsolete, that the future doesn't belong to us. He will offer money for us to quit and walk away in silence." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "But my father's legacy is not for sale. The future of your families is not for sale." A murmur of approval swept through the crowd. It was then that the plan, rehearsed throughout the night, clicked into action. Gustavo stepped forward. "This man, Herr Steiner, wants us to believe we have no choice, but he is wrong." Large screens, quickly set up, lit up next to the platform, displaying graphs and financial news headlines. "Herr Steiner has a weakness, and that weakness is us." Gustavo, using his ability to transform complex data into compelling narratives, explained the importance of the Bastos lightweight alloy patent and how it threatened the core of Steiner's empire. "Today, We will not defend ourselves. We will attack. The phrase, coming from the man they always saw as the personification of managerial arrogance, electrified the crowd. We leaked to the European financial press, through Atty Davies' contacts, that Bastos Industrial Holdings is in advanced negotiations with an investment fund to finance the mass production of our revolutionary alloy. It's a bluff, but a bluff that, at this very moment, is making the stock price of Aerosteiner plummet on the Frankfurt Exchange. On the screens, the real-time graph showed Steiner's stock line diving red. A collective shout of astonishment and joy erupted in the yard. Fear had transformed into power. They were no longer passive victims. They were an army, and they were ready to receive their enemy. The black helicopter descended from the Pittsburgh skies like a bird of prey, its blades churning the air and raising a cloud of dust in the Bastos Industrial Holdings yard. Herr Steiner, a tall, slender man in an impeccable grey suit, disembarked with the confidence of a conqueror. He expected to find divided leadership and demoralized employees ready to accept any crumbs he offered. Instead, he found an army. Hundreds of workers stood in silence, forming a human corridor from the landing area to the administrative building entrance. Their faces showed no fear, but a cold, defiant resolution. There were no shouts or protests. Their silence was far more intimidating. Steiner and his entourage of lawyers walked through this corridor, the initial arrogance giving way to visible unease. In the boardroom, the same room where the drama had begun the day before, Bianca awaited him. She was not seated at the head of the table, the traditional place of power, but in the middle, like an equal. Gustavo and Atty Davies were by her side. Steiner entered, forcing a smile that didn't reach his icy blue eyes. "Miss Bastos, I presume." "An unusual ascent," he said, his voice carrying a heavy German accent, the word unusual dripping with sarcasm. "I came to make you a generous offer that will spare everyone prolonged suffering." Bianca faced him, the calmness in her demeanor disarming him. "Herr Steiner," she replied, her voice firm, "I believe there has been a misunderstanding. You are not here to make us an offer. We called you here to present one to you." One of Steiner's lawyers let out a snorting laugh. "You are not in a position to demand anything." It was Gustavo who responded, sliding a tablet across the mahogany table. "Perhaps you'd like to take a look at your stock quote on the Frankfurt Exchange over the last 40 minutes. Steiner looked at the screen. The smile vanished from his face, replaced by a mask of contained fury. The red line continued its dizzying descent, a cheap trick, a market rumor. "This means nothing." Bianca leaned forward. "It means the world now knows about the Bastos lightweight alloy. It means that every minute you spend here trying to intimidate us, more of your investors lose money, serious money, and they start to wonder if you still have control of the situation." She picked up a document that Atty Davies handed her. "This is our proposal. Not for sale, for partnership." Steiner looked at the paper as if it were poisonous. "Partnership with a bankrupt company?" "We are not bankrupt. We have an asset you need, not to gain more, but to avoid losing what you already have," Bianca continued. "We will give you exclusivity on the distribution of the new alloy for the aerospace sector. In exchange, you will provide us with the necessary investment capital to modernize our factory and begin production. You won't buy Bastos Industrial Holdings. You will invest in it, and we will both profit. Your stock will recover, and our company will rise again." The room fell into a tense silence. It was a masterstroke, transforming a hostile takeover into an investment proposal that Steiner desperately needed to stem his own financial bleeding. The hunter was about to become the partner. Herr Steiner's face was a canvas where a silent battle was waged between wounded pride and cold calculation. He looked from the document on the table to the graph of his falling shares on the tablet, and then to the faces before him. He saw the strategic intelligence in Gustavo's eyes, the legal solidity in Atti, Davies's posture, and, most importantly, the unshakable strength in Bianca's gaze. He was a man who had built his fortune by recognizing power, and in that room, the power had shifted sides. Her offer was not only ingenious, it was an honorable exit for him. Rejecting it purely out of ego would cost him hundreds of millions of euros and, worse, show the market that he could be destabilized by a company everyone considered insignificant. Accepting, on the other hand, would turn a crisis into an opportunity, allowing him to announce a strategic partnership and reverse investor panic. "You played well," he said finally, his voice devoid of emotion. He pushed the tablet back to the center of the table. "My lawyers will be in touch with Atti, Davies, to finalize the terms of the investment." The word came out with difficulty, but it came out. It was the sound of surrender. In that instant, the weight that had hung over Bastos Industrial Holdings for months dissipated. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room, so soft it was almost inaudible, but deeply felt. The war was over, and they had won. Steiner stood up, adjusted his suit, and without another look, turned his back and left the room, his entourage hurrying after him. The sound of his helicopter taking off minutes later was the melody of victory. When the sound faded, a different silence fell over the room. It was not a silence of tension, but of exhaustion and a settling new reality. Bianca looked at Gustavo. The antagonism between them had dissolved in the trenches of the battle they fought together. What remained was a reluctant respect and the awareness of the blood they shared. "You were brilliant," she said, and the sincerity in her voice surprised him. Gustavo shrugged, a gesture that was a mixture of his old pride and a new humility. "The plan was solid. You led." It was the closest to an apology and recognition he was capable of giving, and for Bianca, it was enough. Atti Davies, with a genuine smile for the first time in days, began organizing the paperwork. "We have a lot of work ahead of us. Negotiating contract terms, restructuring the board, communicating with shareholders." Bianca interrupted him gently. "Yes, we do. But first, there is one thing that needs doing." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the yard where the employees were still waiting, anxious for news. "The victory is not ours, Atti Davies. It is theirs." She turned to Gustavo. "Come with me." He hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. Together, the two children of Armando Bastos, the secret heiress and the deposed prince, left the boardroom to announce to their people that their father's dream had not died. On the contrary, it was about to be reborn, stronger and more resilient than ever, forged not just in steel, but in the courage of a rediscovered family. The main conflicts were resolved, the company was saved, and the narrative arcs of the siblings had found a point of convergence and redemption. Months later, Bastos Industrial Holdings was a transformed place. Steiner's investment, renegotiated on highly favorable terms by a surprisingly astute Bianca with guidance from Attidas Davies, injected the necessary capital for a complete modernization. New, quieter machines replaced the old equipment, and the Bastos Lightweight Alloy project, now the company's flagship, was in full production, generating record profits. The air in the factory was no longer one of apprehension, but of optimism and pride. Bianca, now chairwoman of the board, divided her time between the boardroom and the factory floor. She knew every employee by name, their stories, their families. She instituted profit sharing and training programs, ensuring that the wealth generated was shared with those who produced it. The company was no longer just a business. It had truly become the community her father always dreamed of. Gustavo found a new role for himself. Bianca, in a gesture of reconciliation and pragmatism, appointed him Director of International Strategy. Stripped of the arrogance that the presidency imposed on him, he flourished. His brilliant mind for business, now serving a greater purpose than his own enrichment, opened new markets and forged global alliances that solidified the company's position. The siblings worked together, their skills complementing each other perfectly. Discussions were sometimes heated, but always ended with mutual respect. They were, finally, getting to know each other, building the bridge over the chasm life had created between them. On a sunny afternoon, Bianca found Gustavo standing in front of the old vault, which had been kept in the boardroom as a memorial. "I understand now," he said, without turning around. "Dad didn't want to punish me. He wanted to save me. He knew I was drowning in wealth and forgetting about value." Bianca stood beside him. "He wanted us to see what he saw," she said softly, "that the greatest wealth he built wasn't the assets on the balance sheet, but the people. The inheritance wasn't the money, it was the legacy." That day, they took the original founding document, the one that started everything, and had it framed. They didn't hang it in the CEO's office, but in the main employee cafeteria, where all workers could see it every day. Beneath it, they placed a small brass plaque with the inscription, "Founded on a dream, a sacrifice, and a blue, 75 Chevy Nova, October 22nd, 1975. The story of Bianca and Gustavo became a legend within the company.